Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the History Cloak channel. I'm Mr. McGee. Now, it's been a hot minute, but we are back, and today's video is going to focus on Article 2 of the Constitution, the executive branch. Now, if you're asking yourself, hey, wait a second, did you even do Article 1, the legislative branch? Rest assured you have not lost your mind. I have not done a video on that. That will be my second video. I want to focus on Article 2, the executive branch, because the executive branch is all anyone's been talking about over the last 3-4 months. So we might as well go ahead, look at the executive branch first, and see how that ties into the legislative branch, and then eventually we're going to do the judicial branch afterwards. So ladies and gentlemen, we're about to tackle Article 2 of the Constitution, the executive branch. Let's begin. Now, Article 2 of the Constitution is broken into 4 sections, and we're going to take a look at each of those sections and see how it pertains to the president and if there have been any changes made to Article 2 of the Constitution. So let's take a look at Section 1, the election of the president. Now, Section 1 goes into a lot of detail about how the president is chosen. This is where the Electoral College is set up. I'll leave a link in the description box to the video that I did on the Electoral College in case you want to take a look. But what we need to know is the Electoral College is set up, and interestingly enough, the way the vice president was chosen at the beginning of the country is a lot different from the way it is now. So let's put it this way. When you had an election, the Electoral College would vote, and whoever got the most votes would become president. Well, whoever got the second largest number of votes would become the vice president. Now, you might be thinking, hey, that doesn't seem too bad. First place president, second place vice president. Well, let's just put it this way. Think of modern day America. Let's start from the 2016 election. Donald Trump is elected president, and Hillary Clinton finished second. Can you imagine an America where Donald Trump is president and Hillary Clinton is his vice president? Now, fast forward to 2020. Joe Biden wins the election. Can you imagine an America where Joe Biden is president and Donald Trump is his vice president? Take this last election. Can you imagine Donald Trump as president and Kamala Harris as his vice president? Now, if you just regained consciousness from fainting at the shock of even imagining that possibility, everyone realized what a disaster choosing the vice president in this way would be once George Washington decided not to seek a third term. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were bitter rivals with major disagreements. And with John Adams winning the presidency and then Thomas Jefferson being his vice president, speaking of acrimony, that's our word of the day. Follow that up with Thomas Jefferson winning the presidency and Aaron Burr winning the vice presidency and Thomas Jefferson not trusting Aaron Burr. Well, after that, a new amendment was added to the Constitution. This is why the 12th Amendment to the Constitution was passed. The 12th Amendment stipulates that the president and the vice president will be voted for on separate ballots, meaning you can't have a presidential ballot and then whoever finishes second becomes vice president. They are on separate ballots, and of course, if you have followed any elections, you know that the president and vice president are one ticket essentially, even though they're voted on by the Electoral College on 2 separate ballots. That keeps your enemy, politically speaking, from becoming the vice president and undermining what you want to do in the executive branch. So there is a process to amend or fix the Constitution if problems arise. Article 2, Section 2 focuses on the military, advice and consent, and pardon power. So this section invests the president with power over the military. He is the commander-in-chief, the highest rank in the military. He controls the military, and it also says that he controls all the departments of the executive branch. In essence, they answer to him. Also, the president has the power to grant pardons and reprieves. In other words, he can commute sentences. Now, to say that there have been some debates recently about presidential pardon power, see Joe Biden and Donald Trump on that would be an understatement. But in order to actually lessen the president's pardon power, that would take an amendment added to the Constitution. The president can also sign any treaty and appoint any judge to the judicial branch, but the Senate has the power of advice and consent. In other words, a treaty that the president signs does not take effect unless the Senate votes on it and approves it. The same thing with judges. The president can appoint whoever he wants to be a judge, but unless the Senate actually votes and approves it, that person will not become a judge whatsoever. Section 3 of Article 2, the State of the Union, and executing the laws. The president has the power to call both houses of Congress together to address them. Now, presidents early on in the United States did that through writing. You wrote a letter explaining, hey, here's what's going on with the country. Here is what I would like you guys to do to help out with A, B, and C problems. Now, that has morphed over time from the president will, from time to time, let Congress know the State of the Union to once a year, the president gives a nationally televised address to a joint session of Congress. We've actually come to expect it every year, normally around January. But also, the president doesn't just have to give a State of the Union. The president can, if he wants, call a joint session of Congress together. In other words, bringing the Senate and the House together to hear an address that he needs to make to them. Now, we saw that recently with President Trump. It wasn't a State of the Union address because he had just been elected, but he did call together a joint session of Congress to speak to them about subjects on his mind. The joint session of Congress speech, or the State of the Union speech, have actually become over time a way for the president to directly address the country as well as Congress. This, of course, allows the president to address problems in the country or to be able to tout his successes to the American people as well as Congress. Also, and very importantly, the president is in charge of the entire executive branch. He is in charge of executing the laws. Power is actually invested in the president in terms of running the executive branch and in making sure the executive branch does its job. The final section of Article 2, the impeachment and conviction of the president. Very simply put, it states that the president, the vice president, and any other civil officers may be removed from their office if they are impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate. That's pretty much it. It's very short, but it's important because the founding fathers did not want a king/dictator arising in the U.S. So, in order to do that, there had to be something that the president could look at and go, ooh, if I do this, I can be removed from office. Now, by the way, removed from office has to be for the commitment of treason, high crimes, and misdemeanors. And not misdemeanors the way we mean it today, like, ooh, you forgot to pay your traffic ticket. Misdemeanors, think of them as felonies for us today. It has to be a major crime that the president has committed in order to be removed from office. Now, you may have noticed recently that there have been a few debates over, hey, what can the president do in terms of departments in the executive branch? Well, one of the things about Article 2 is that the president has power to run the departments in the executive branch kind of the way he wants. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at the Department of Education, since that's been in the news recently, and after all, hey, I teach for a living, why not the Department of Education? Since it was created by Congress, the president cannot close the Department of Education, but he can restructure it. He can decide how it's going to work. So he might decide to make it smaller. He could decide to make it larger. He could take parts of the jobs that the Department of Education does and move it to other departments. It's within his power. So a lot of the debates that we're seeing need to have a little bit of nuance, which is why it's important to read the Constitution. So Congress allocates a certain amount of money to the Department of Education, but unless they specify $1 million must be spent on oranges for the Department of Education. Well, the president then has power to decide how the money is used within the Department of Education. So, as you're watching the debates and reading the Constitution so you actually know what powers the executive and legislative branch have, the easiest way to put it is the president cannot remove a department that's created by Congress, but he can restructure it. And he can determine how money is spent within that department. Because, as we looked at with Article 2, he is the head of the executive branch. And power is invested in the president to make decisions about the executive branch and to run it the way he wants. So I hope you're beginning to see why it's important to read the Constitution. The Constitution really is not a very long document as far as legal documents are concerned. It's actually a fairly easy read, and so within this wonderful news cycle that we're in, where lots of different things about the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial branch are being debated, I think this is a perfect time to grab a copy of the Constitution and actually read it for yourself. That way you know what the powers are for each of the branches, instead of just listening to commentators or news broadcasts and hoping they're telling you the right thing. Look it up for yourself. On our next episode, we're going to take a look at Article 1, the powers of the legislative branch. So, as per the usual, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them respectfully and politely in the description box below. I'm Mr. McGee. Take care.